Potassium deficiency is an issue in soybean here in Wisconsin. That's often likely because potassium is seen as less important. So we need to change the perception and make sure people are applying enough K for their rotations. It's important to maintain adequate soil test K levels to make sure that we have good growth and development of the soybean crop. As you can see here, we've pulled off all the pods from a plant where we had applied the highest rate of phosphorus, that's 90 pounds per acre, and no potassium. Now when we open up the pod, you can see the 3 beans, but they're not very full, kind of a thin bean yet. Now here we have a treatment where we've got the same 90 pounds of phosphate that we had before, and this also is 120 pounds of potash applied. And you can see that there's more pods here than what there was where we had 90 pounds of phosphate and no potassium. So when we look at 90 pounds of phosphate applied and no potassium, that would be on the left side versus with 120 pounds of K on the right side. We can see that they're both 3 bean pods, but where potassium was applied, the beans are more fully filled out. And if we think about all the plants in an acre, you can see that the differences between these treatments would add up. So on low K testing plots, where we didn't apply any K, we yielded 37 bushels per acre. And on the plots where we applied 120 pounds of K, we yielded 54 bushels per acre. So this 17 bushel yield increase is equivalent to about $164 per acre. Now we have to factor in the cost of the potash fertilizer, and that means that our return to potassium would be closer to $137 per acre. Now if we had 200 acres of soybean on our farm, that means that our yield increase from applying K fertilizer would be a little bit more than $27,000 per year.
One example of where potassium impacts a plant and then that impacts its vulnerability to insects would be actually some research that we did here in Wisconsin. Farmers had noted that fields that had lower potassium levels and were showing symptomology of having low potassium actually had more soybean aphid pressure on them. The researchers wanted to find out if this was really true and why that was true, and they did find higher levels of aphids on the low potassium soybeans. They found plants that had low potassium also were high in a specific amino acid that was particularly good for soybean aphid. So the aphids were able to have a shorter life cycle and their populations were able to grow more quickly. This graph illustrates the population growth rate of aphids on soybean plants, and you can see there's more aphids over time on the plants that have low potassium, where over time there's less aphids on the plants that have adequate potassium.
When we have drought conditions, we're more likely to see potassium deficiency, even if soil test K levels are in the optimum range. We also can see more K deficiency showing up in compacted soils. And in those situations where we maybe see some potassium deficiency due to drought, you don't have water flowing into the plant roots, so we're not taking up potassium. And in compacted conditions, the roots are just not exploring as large a volume of soil, and they don't have access to the K. So sometimes having a little bit higher soil test K level, you may not see those deficiencies show up if you had the conditions of compaction or some short-term dryness. So regardless of when you apply your potassium for soybeans, whether it's before the soybeans or you apply all your potassium to your corn crop to cover both corn and soybeans, you need to make potassium a priority. It's really important to improve your profitability.